Welcome back. This is the second lecture that I have created for Enigma University, and this one will talk about characterizing aphasia. If you haven't yet, please visit lecture 1, where we talk more about what is aphasia generally, what causes it, how often it occurs, and also some critical definitions related to language and communication. Aphasia is often characterized into types. Now, some of these types are more common than others. Some just are more well-known than others. An example of a very well-known type of aphasia is Broca's aphasia. In the field, we think of types in different ways. So some ways we think about it, we call it dichotomous classification, meaning one or the other. You can see on the left-hand side two types of dichotomous classification. Non-fluent, one type, versus fluent, and then expressive versus receptive. In pink, I have highlighted on this graph to the right what subtypes of aphasia would fall into being considered non-fluent or expressive types of aphasia. Those are broadly the same thing, meaning that these individuals typically have the most issues with producing language, and they also tend to have relatively good auditory comprehension. Now, on the other side of this graph, you can see yellow. These are individuals we typically will call fluent or expressive. And I should say we typically try not to call the individuals themselves fluent. We tend to say their language is fluent. So individuals with fluent or receptive types of aphasia tend to be those who have more impairments in auditory comprehension, understanding what's said to them. And they also tend to produce language that is a little bit more empty and vague. This is because they have impairments in accessing words and the meanings of words. Now, you'll also notice that there are a ton of types at the bottom of this nice flowchart. We call these a spectrum of types, and sometimes they're referred to as connectionist types. Some aphasia batteries, which means a large test to evaluate the type of aphasia and severity of aphasia that a person has, will help you to classify what type of aphasia that they have according to this like bottom row here. So to the far left, remember that those 4 are considered non-fluent or expressive types. Within that, you've got individuals with global aphasia. Now, if you follow this flowchart, you'll see that they produce very effortful speech, so their speech is not fluent, and that takes us down the left side of this flowchart. They can't understand spoken messages, meaning they have impaired auditory comprehension. Again, that takes us down the left of the flowchart. They cannot repeat words or phrases that are said to them. Takes us again left, we land in global aphasia. Now, within many of these types of aphasias, we see a variety of severities, meaning that in some of these types of aphasias, in particular Broca's aphasia, conduction aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, we do have a variety of severities that are present. So someone with Broca's aphasia may have a more severe impairment in word finding than another person who tests as having Broca's aphasia. So while these types are very useful in giving a shared name to a collection of symptoms, they're not all that useful in understanding exactly what in each person's language system is impaired, what is a strength. So we use these types broadly just to characterize what we're seeing, but when we are thinking about treatment or assessment, we really want to focus on what is a strength and a weakness in the language system and more broadly in the communication system. So we don't want to pick treatments or assessments just based on an aphasia type. We want to pick these based on what the strengths and weaknesses of the person are, and we also want to take into account things that are related to the person outside of just language alone. Things like, what activities do they like to participate in? In other words, where are they using their language and communication skills? What type of a supportive environment do they have to relearn these skills? So we need to take those into account too, and of course, just if we only looked at aphasia type, we wouldn't be able to do that. The fact that severity can range within these types is the main point of this slide, just to very much hammer home there's a ton of variability within each subtype of aphasia and across all of the aphasia subtypes in terms of the language impairments and strengths that these individuals have. I want to direct everyone to a fantastic resource. It's called Aphasia Bank. I would love to record specific videos of individuals with aphasia and have them here, but for personal and privacy reasons, that's something I'm not going to do. So if you'd like to learn more about symptoms and varying language impairments that you might see in individuals with aphasia, please check out Aphasia Bank. You can see the link down below, aphasia.talkbank.org. In the Grand Round section under Teaching, you'll see that there's a section for students. It is password protected. So to get there, you just simply have to click on the ground rules, and it'll take you through the process of requesting access. It's really easy and all about maintaining privacy and security for using this database to learn more about aphasia. It really is a great database with a lot of videos of individuals with aphasia speaking, doing a variety of tasks, and it really does help to emphasize all of the individual differences that you can see in individuals with acquired aphasia. Right now, the gold standard for treating aphasia is speech-language therapy. This was recently evaluated in a systematic review in 2016, which you can see cited at the top there, which evaluated speech therapy versus no therapy and found that speech therapy was very helpful for improving language in chronic aphasia, so individuals who have had aphasia for at least 6 months. Now, what that review wasn't able to do is evaluate the different types of speech therapy interventions and how they impact aphasia. So, for example, there are a lot of evidence-based treatments out there that train different aspects of language. Now, this is very specific to the individual with aphasia, because someone who has, let's say, a word-finding impairment that's due to a lack of semantic knowledge may not respond in the same way to a therapy as someone who has a word-finding impairment due to a phonological or sound access impairment. So it's really hard to say what treatments are overall better. It's more about asking the question, what treatment would most benefit the individual with aphasia that I'm working with based on their language impairments as well as strengths, as well as what their goals are. What do they want to improve about their language and their communication? There are also compensatory-based strategies. So what I was just talking about were impairment-based strategies where the option or the goal is to improve language itself. Now, there are also compensatory remediation techniques where you want to develop some strategies that overall improve how the person communicates. This might be using assistive devices like a phone, or using training perhaps in nonverbal communication like gesture. So there's a lot of techniques out there. There is a lot of evidence out there. If you're interested in evaluating or learning more about the evidence in aphasia, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, ASHA, has an evidence map specific to aphasia where you can evaluate the current systematic reviews and evidence around treatment types. Head over there if you'd like more information. While speech therapy is absolutely the gold standard for treating aphasia across all the time courses of aphasia from acute to chronic, there are some new options that are being made available and being evaluated. We call these adjuvant options or additional options that should coincide with speech therapy. So these are not meant to be done alone without doing speech therapy. They're meant to add on to the effectiveness of speech therapy. I've given an example here that I worked on as a part of a lab at South Carolina that was looking at a transcranial direct current stimulation device. You can see the lady on the right wearing one. There's a variety of versions. This is an example of one. This type of a device gives out very low level electrical current to the brain. And the idea is that this low-level electrical current changes the threshold of the neuron so that it fires a little bit easier, it lowers the threshold of neuron firing, and it's thought to improve learning because of that. So it will help neurons fire a little bit more, a little earlier, let's say. So it'll improve the speech therapy because it'll almost prime the brain in a way. Now, this is oversimplified, of course, and the evidence is still being accumulated on whether and for whom this type of therapy is most effective. So keep an eye out for therapies like this that might actually add on to the benefit that speech therapy already has. Individuals with aphasia after stroke go through a variety of brain changes that enable them to recover. So in this graph you see on the right, there are three boxes or shading, I guess you could say, that represent different stages that the brain goes through when it's recovering from a trauma like a stroke. So in the bottom left corner, you can see that in the first hours and days, tissue reperfusion is what's happening. That means when you have a stroke, the parts of the brain affected by the stroke are deprived of oxygen and blood for a certain amount of time. After the stroke is treated, blood and oxygen reperfuse. They go to those areas that were affected by the stroke, and in many cases, some of those brain areas may not be completely lost because of this. They're reperfused, they may be salvageable. In the gray box, you can see that takes place over days to months, is the reestablishment of brain organization. Now, this means that the brain is reestablishing its connections to itself. So neurons talk to each other through a variety of connections, long ways, as in it might connect the occipital lobe at the back of the head all the way to the frontal lobe at the front, or very short connections, one neuron to another right next to each other. The brain tries to reestablish what is still available in terms of connections, and if possible, it tries to rebuild those connections. Now, in months and many years after that dark blue box, what's happening is that the brain is trying to engage in as many compensatory processes as possible, such as regrowing dendrites, which receive information on the neuron body, regrowing or lengthening out axons, which are the information senders. Just as some examples, regrowing blood vessels to give more blood to certain areas can also occur. All of these we call neuroplastic mechanisms. This is how the brain is able to deal with trauma and still be able to perform. So what we know about aphasia is that someone with aphasia can continue to improve years after their stroke or whatever event caused their aphasia. There is an old wives' tale where whatever gains you make in the first 6 months are all the gains you're ever going to make after a stroke and having aphasia. That's just not true. The evidence base does not support that. We have seen improvement many years, and I'm talking 15 to 20 years down the line after stroke, in people improving not only their language, but also their communication strategies. And the reasons for this is that the brain is able to compensate and works on changing itself many years down the line. Now, of course, I'm talking like the brain is a sentient entity here, but the brain is responding to input that it gets from the outside. So speech therapy is causing those changes because it's making the brain really have to work, right? It's making these connections, reorganizing the brain because you are asking it to do so, right? You're practicing language, you're doing it a lot at a high rate. So you are causing these changes in the brain by participating in things like speech therapy. That's why it's so important to stay motivated if possible, to keep going as often as possible. Many other neuroplastic principles like salience, making sure that what you're working on in speech therapy is important for you and you find value in it. All of these neuroplastic principles help to keep improving aphasia over the years, not just the months after a stroke. I want to leave you with this idea that you, now being knowledgeable about aphasia and aware of aphasia, can improve how you communicate with people who have aphasia, and you can also improve how people you know and interact with communicate with people with aphasia. There are great resources out on the web. One of them is called Supported Communication for Adults with Aphasia. SCA is that acronym, and it teaches some strategies for revealing competence in those speakers with aphasia. For example, if you're talking to someone with aphasia, there's no need to yell unless they have a confirmed hearing impairment, but it's great to talk at a typical volume and talk a little bit slower to make sure that the individual with aphasia is following, and check in with that person. Ask comprehension questions that are simple. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? You can also reveal competence by saying, let me repeat to you what I heard you say to make sure that I understand you right. These are just some examples of communicating with a person with aphasia where the communication partner, in this case me, I'm trying to acknowledge and reveal their communication competence. This is super important in healthcare settings where we need to confirm that an individual with aphasia has the ability to give informed consent about their health care. And of course, in research environments as well, where we're conducting studies that are engaging with people with aphasia, those individuals need to know what the study is about, what risks are involved in the study, and to do that, we need to know that they understand. And so we need to use these strategies to communicate with them to ensure that they understand, and also to change how we communicate to make sure that we are adapting to what they need. That might involve shortening our phrases. That might involve using some words on a PowerPoint slide for them to read, if reading is a strength for them. Using some images to make sure that they understand a more difficult concept. All of these are great strategies for communicating with people with aphasia, as well as just great strategies in general, even without aphasia, in making sure that all parties understand exactly what you mean. If you have any questions about what was said in this PowerPoint or you'd like clarification, please email me. My email is down below. My lab conducts research on language and communication in aphasia. You can visit us at theneuralresearchlab.com to learn a little bit more and to see what current research studies we have going on. Again, feel free to reach out anytime for clarification questions related to this lecture, but also aphasia in general.